Welcome to the Rogue Journal Club, where we tear studies apart so you don't have to. The Rogue Journal Club is a ScioSophia production, featuring long-form discussions of peer-reviewed studies published in academic journals and their connections to society. I'm Adrian.
And I'm Gina. We'll be your hosts.
A journal club is when academics at universities get together to talk about papers.
But we've gone rogue. We're going to do Journal Club our way. Join us.
We're back.
Hey, folks.
And it's the irony that we're bringing this to people on the internet, and we have an article about the internet.
Yes.
It's
Indeed.
a little bit of irony. I think did you find this one or did I find it? I can't remember.
I think you found it and you emailed it to me and said, I have some doubts about their results. And then I was like, yeah, this is interesting. Because actually, at that time that you sent it to me, I was gearing up to cancel my cell phone, which I did. I'm living a cell phone free life now. It's been really interesting. I actually didn't realize how little I actually need a cell phone until I canceled it. It did change a few things, but not as much as you'd think. So anyway, and I'm still doing it even after reading this paper. So if it tells you anything about, papers are just papers at the end of the day. So
I suppose before we get into the actual article, I just previewed the article and might as well do our lovely plug here for our lovely friends over at Wokescreen.com/culture-warriors, where we're doing more lovely stuff over there, starting to build out some courses for it on how to read articles like we do and all of these kinds of fun things. And of course, Wokescreen itself is a fantastic place with games night behind the scenes and games night, of course, on Twitch at the same time, which is all sorts of fun, very fun things happen there. Community call, I actually just got off of a community call as we started recording this, so that was a grand old time there. So you don't know what you're missing because it's a grand old time to go there and to help build culture that you want to see rather than some of the crazy things that we see out there today. So if you want to respite, Wokescreen.com/culture-warriors. Use my promo code on the screen, ScioSophia, to get 10% off your membership. That's it. Back to me. Okay.
I can endorse, even though I don't like the internet, that the people in the community Adrian was just referring to are pretty cool people. So I just don't go there because I don't like the internet, not the people. If I could hang out with if I could hang out with all of you in person, that would be great. But
I don't
we all live very far away from each other, sadly.
We're all international because there's folks in there from Australia, and there's folks in there from the UK, and there's folks in here from the US. So we're kind of all over the place, and arranging things on multiple time zones is an interesting challenge.
Yeah. Well, all right. So go for it. Introduce this paper to us.
Yes. I'm going to apologize in advance that I do not know how to pronounce the authors' names, their last names in particular. So we're going to do the best we can on that. But this is appeared in a 2024 edition of Technology, Mind, and Behavior, which is published by the American Psychological Association. And it's a study called A Multiverse Analysis of the Associations Between Internet Use and Well-Being by Maddie Vore and Andrew Przybylski. I don't know. Yes.
I think Vora and Przybylski. I don't know. Good effort, I suppose.
My apologies to the authors if you end up watching this. I just generally do not know how to pronounce your names. And so what we have here is internet technologies and platforms' potential psychological consequences remain debated. While these technologies have spurred new forms of commerce, education, and leisure, many are worried that they might negatively affect individuals by, for example, displacing time spent on healthy activities. Relevant findings to date have been inconclusive and of limited geographic and demographic scope. I skipped a line when I started reading that. We examined whether having mobile internet access or actively using the internet predicted 8 well-being outcomes from 2006 to 2021 among 2,414,294 individuals across 168 countries, which is pretty damn large, actually.
It's a lot. Yeah.
We first queried the extent to which well-being varied as a function of internet connectivity. Then we examined these associations' robustness in a multiverse of 33,792 analysis specifications. Of these, 84.9% resulted in positive and statistically significant associations between internet connectivity and well being. These results indicate that internet access and use predict well being positively and independently from a set of plausible alternatives. Which is to say, the conclusions they came to are having access to the internet is apparently good for your well being overall, which,
Yeah, and you know, and that's not actually what these results say. Like, so we can talk about that, but what they did, I don't know if I'm qualified to even really explain the details. Maybe you can help me with this, but they did a regression analysis to look at associations,
mhm,
and that doesn't necessarily demonstrate any kind of causal link. Fortunately, they do say that. They actually said that in some part of the
yeah,
discussion. So, I'm not calling the researchers irresponsible or anything. I think they are not irresponsible. This is an enormous study that's basically averaging these effects over the entire, well, 168 countries. I don't want to say the
yeah,
entire planet, but a lot of people. Like
close to
it's a
it, to be honest.
it's a fairly comprehensive study, and and they also did not write a survey and give it to everyone. They used existing data from the Gallup World Poll. So these are questions that were asked to all these people in 1-hour interviews for different reasons than what these researchers are using the data for, but they subscribe to the Gallup data, so they had to pay for it. It's a proprietary data set that you can't get online just like as
Right,
anyone. Um, so they got a hold of this data and like kind of reanalyzed it and recoded it and looked at associations. And so when you analyze something like this, you do end up getting uh, any signal that you get is rising up above, like, averaging over this giant spread of results. So, averaging all of these effects over that many people is probably going to result in mostly middle of the road results. So it's
mhm,
masking the fact that there might be pockets of people
right,
around the world who are very much negatively impacted by the internet or very much positively impacted by the internet. And this study's not going to reveal that. They're looking at kind of like an aggregate effect. And so
mhm.
that's does that agree with your understanding of it?
Yeah, yeah, and I would add to it, I was just running it because I couldn't remember the exact year, and my brain wasn't necessarily wanting to do math today, because
It's a weekend.
it is a weekend as we're recording this, yeah. Um, no, because one of the things they don't make a distinction of here, I don't believe, I gotta go look at some of the stuff again. Yeah, they don't make a distinction, for it. They just say internet connectivity and adoption versus other kinds of
Yeah,
factors that could be affecting, your well-being, as it were. But they just say internet connectivity. They don't make a distinction between being connected to the internet and social media. They
right.
don't make any distinctions with that. And the reason it kind of matters in here is because when was the iPhone first released? Do you remember?
Oh 07, oh 06,
2007.
somewhere
Yeah,
around there.
2007.
7,
It was
yeah,
17 years ago. And this sample that they did outcomes for runs 2006 to 2021. So somewhere in the middle there, the iPhone was introduced, which gave us the launching off point for all sorts of things with Facebook and Twitter and all the rest, here now. That's the reason that kind of concerns me as to whether or not they got some kind of weird confounding effect going on, because there's two different things, right? For one thing,
yeah,
we do know about studies that suggest that too much social media use actually does lead to the opposite and some serious consequences for mental health. We know that, and they didn't get into that in this study, which was actually disappointing. I was hoping they would get into that somewhat, because it's not like the social media stuff is new at this point.
yeah,
It's
I
been
think
studied for a while.
it's possible they didn't because there wasn't a Gallup question about social media specifically, which they couldn't, so then they couldn't get that level of granularity from this data set. But I do, in their defense, they did
Sure.
point out at the very end, which we will probably get to at some point in more
Yeah.
detail, but they said, uh Where did it go? I tried to
Like,
highlight all this stuff. Well, they did point to a couple of studies. Um, oh, okay. We
I was
did,
gonna say if you
however,
can.
observe. Yeah, I found it. It's at the bottom of, it's actually in the discussion section in like the third paragraph. So if you can find the
Oh,
discussion,
yeah,
yeah,
I
there
see
it
it.
is. Yeah, we did, however, observe a notable group of negative associations between internet use and community well being. These negative associations were specific to young 15 to 24-year-old women's reports of community well being. They occurred across the full spectrum of covariate specs and were thereby not likely driven by a particular model specification. So they're saying that that's not an artifact, I guess,
Yeah,
of the analysis. It might be a real signal.
yeah,
Although not an identified causal relation, this finding is concordant with previous reports of increased cyberbullying and more negative associations between social media use and depressive symptoms. So they did actually mention a couple of, like, they cited a couple of those studies. Um, and I didn't look at those references. I don't know what actually those studies are that they're citing,
well,
but
yeah,
they
one of them
did
is
a little bit.
behind one of the by one of the authors of this paper, because this author right here. Oh,
Oh, the cyberbullying. Right, right.
yeah, the
I should have
cyberbullying one.
recognized that last, yeah, the last name. And then the other 2 about social media are somebody else. But I wanted to say though, that was one of the things about this paper that surprised me is why didn't they put that finding in the abstract? Because that is actually interesting that that signal popped up even with this global averaging, that
Yeah,
still came out. And I think that is actually a credit to the internet maybe having some problems. And then that the way that you initially shared this with me, I'm remembering now, is that it was on Nature News, and it was a news
yes,
article about the
yes,
study basically making the claim that, "Yeah, the internet's totally fine for you and all the olds are freaking out for nothing." But that isn't really what this paper said, especially if you dig into the discussion and find that little nugget buried in there, which basically validates a lot of what Jonathan Haidt was saying
yeah,
about how it affects young girls and its social and community well-being primarily.
yeah.
Um, so if
It's
that
it,
effect is popping up even in a global study, it must be serious.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I was gonna say that that's a huge part of it now, at least from the cyberbullying things. And I wish this is where I wish Deb were here because she would know these off the top of her head better than I would even. And that
Mm,
the kind of internet connectivity things and cyberbullying are a huge issue, particularly for young girls in school. But not just young girls anymore. I mean, it's really anybody could end up being cyberbullied now, and it leads to all sorts of bad things, as it were. And so
yeah.
I'm not surprised. I mean, it should have been acknowledged more in the abstract. You're right. I don't know why it wasn't. That's
That
kind of a
seems
big deal.
Yeah, because their little phrase where they said, "We examined these associations, and 84.9% of the associations resulted in a positive and statistically significant" resulted in positive and statistically significant associations between internet connectivity and well-being. So that's like, that's true. That is what one of the things they found, and that gives the impression that this is an overall positive thing and that there wasn't any notable negative things found, but it looks like there actually was.
Hmm.
So having a little, I mean, I don't know, maybe if the authors were here, they'd explain why they didn't include that. And maybe there's a good reason. So I'm not saying they did something wrong, but I am surprised anyway. And it would be interesting to know why they didn't put that in the abstract.
It would
It's just,
be. It would be for
yeah.
sure. But it
So
seems like a kind of important thing given the rest of the literature.
yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't know if I have a whole lot of commentary in general on this study. Is I'm not really inclined to disagree with the findings, but I think I'm going to end up disagreeing with wanting to run with these findings and make these broad conclusions about the internet having no problems and that there's no,
Yeah.
and I don't think the authors would even endorse that interpretation, but that doesn't stop all the journalists from endorsing that interpretation because their livelihood depends on all of us doom scrolling all the stuff they write. So
This is a
of
true
course
statement,
of
unfortunately.
course
Yeah.
they're going to be like internet's great. It's like I don't know.
I'm gonna actually see real quick if I can't find that that article that I first sent to you
Yeah.
about that because I think it would be a good thing just to have a look at. Nature Internet. There we go. For a different. Yep, here it is. Found out about it through this Nature article. Oh, shoot. I can't access it. Oh, that would be a problem.
Oh, well, how
it's
come
behind the
that's
it's behind the Nature paywall. I can put it in
hmm.
the chat, so I can't access it from home. But
Oh, yeah. I
I'll
might
put.
have been able to see it because maybe I had some free articles since I don't really look at nature news very much at all ever because I don't look at news very much at all ever. So,
Yeah, I don't think I can access it right now. So it's there, and it will be linked in the comments
yeah.
of this video for those of you who want to look at it. But yeah, I mean, Nature is usually pretty good about talking about some of the caveats of these things, but even they were on the top line of, no. In fact matter, you can see
Yeah.
the top line of the article here. So maybe I can just share that for a moment instead. But
Yeah.
just so at least people can see what we're talking about. But the thing is, of course, I cannot share the actual thing right now. So that is sad.
Oh,
Yeah, because I mean,
you're
you'll
just
see
pulling up.
you see the access options thing. I unfortunately
Yeah.
can't turn it on right now, but even their like top line thing, a survey of more than 2.4 million people finds that being online can have a positive effect on welfare. That's
Yeah.
not
And this
quite
first
everything there.
sentence, a global 16-year study of 2.4 million people has found that internet use might boost measures of well-being. That is actually a very false interpretation of what this actually is and says. Like,
Yeah,
it wasn't a 16-year study. It was a data set that had covered a 16-year period, but the
exactly.
researchers did not collect it. They used it from someone else. So
Hmm.
it's like retrospective. And then 2.4 million people's accurate, but then it definitely didn't find that using the internet might boost measures of well-being. There's a positive association, but there are many reasons why that association could exist. And
Yeah,
then it also does not mean that you as an individual using the internet, you're having your well-being boosted. It does not mean that at all.
yeah.
And in fact, this study would have no way of knowing that. And that's not what
Hmm.
they were looking at. So
Yeah, I mean,
that
unless
kind
you
of
got
stuff
into.
makes me so mad.
Well, it's the running joke. It's the first logical fallacy of research that we all learn that correlation does not imply causation ever, but
Yeah.
it's all the one always the one everybody breaks. It's the one logical fallacy everybody falls into. It's the first
Yep.
one you learn in research and statistics, and at the same time, everybody at some point does it. It's the strangest
Yeah.
thing. We try not to, because it's a bad fallacy to fall into, but
Mhm.
still. And it's to
And
your
there
point too,
are
because
yeah.
I was going to say it's to your point too, because that's nature, which is supposed to be the creme de la creme of science, which sometimes is and sometimes isn't. Um,
Yeah.
with that falling into the same mistakes, really. Um, and I
Mhm.
will be fair. I don't know how much nature gets involved in talking with the authors when they publish a news article on something, so I'm going to be a little fair on that one. But um, that kind of thing is they may not have talked to the authors about it. I don't know. We don't really know that. We can't know that. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. The other issue with it in terms of fallacies is just not looking at yeah, the causation correlation thing is really common. I think sometimes you can, tentatively assume a causation if you've got enough corollaries and a long enough period of study. So there's like some caveats that you can put on that. So, however, one of the things that went wrong too with that journalist interpretation is just not looking at what the research question was. And I think that
yep,
that's really important because when a paper is studying something, it's studying something very narrow. It's really really hyper focused. And so the conclusion you draw has to be in like direct relation to what the question actually was. And they were looking at, is there a global association? Is there like they were critical of the previous research on this topic because it focused a lot on what they called the global north, which I think
mm,
is like the west, essentially, like wealthy countries that may have, I'm not sure exactly what the global north means, but they're here, maybe I could just look it up. What
I
is the
think
global north?
I think global north is quite literally northern hemisphere just because of the amount of landmass and there being more people in the northern hemisphere than there is in the southern hemisphere. A lot of the southern
Oh,
hemisphere, there is some larger land masses, but there's also a lot of islands.
I think actually we might be wrong. I think so there's a the AI function on the Brave browser has mined some websites for me, and it says the global north refers to the economically developed countries primarily located in Europe, North America, Australia, and Northern Asia. So
Mm,
the global north might be a metaphor, as in not necessarily referring to the north.
right. Okay.
So I think
Well,
that authors are probably right in that a lot of the studies on the internet tend to be kind of Western centric. And, for good reason. I think it took off here first and it's very pervasive here and we have enough leisure time in these countries to like waste time on the internet and have it harm our mental well-being. So if you're in a country where previously you were starving and had a house made out of cow poop and you then have internet access at least in some form, your well-being probably did improve because the internet is associated with other measures of improvement in facilities and infrastructure. And so there would be an association if you included like knocking over my mic stand. If you included some of the less wealthy nations in this data set, then you are going to get a different outcome than if you only measure it in wealthy countries. So I think that that was fair to wonder, and it's hard to get data about those countries. And so
mhm,
the Gallup World Poll was a good place to start, even though, and they mentioned a whole bunch of times, these are not psychometrically validated survey questions. So it's not like if the interviewees are answering these questions about, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your life quality? Like it doesn't mean that this is actually measuring something real, but they said something like because this is such a large data set and it captures places in the world where this is not typically captured, then this is still a valuable object of study, which I think I agree with.
mhm. I would agree with that
Anyway, I've
assessment too, but
completely lost track of what I was even talking about.
that's okay. Oh, we've done that
But
before, I'm
yeah.
sure we'll do that again.
Yeah,
Um,
why did I even go on that whole tangent? I don't know. Hopefully you guys as the listeners understood what the heck I was
mhm.
talking about.
Yeah, well, I think we can go from there and get into some of the I know I had highlighted a bunch of things in the methods and to point out some interesting problems with what they did because I think in the Gallup World Poll thing in particular, there were some of those indices and things that they used that were in existence for only chunks of time during their
Mhm.
study period, which is not to say they actually did the work over 16 years because they did not. Um, but
Yeah, no. Yeah, it might have been a few years because they had to deal with all the data, but like yeah, for sure this was not them collecting this data themselves
mhm,
over 16
yeah.
years. So, yeah, I do have some questions for you about the math. Um like just about what they did with the data. I thought that they messed with this data set a lot. Like they they
They did.
recoded and like converted continuous variables into discrete variables and vice versa and
Well, I mean,
multi
coding,
yeah,
yeah,
like
coding itself is not necessarily a bad thing in that it will help
okay.
simplify data that you're trying to analyze. That's not necessarily a bad
Yeah.
thing. There might be
Okay.
some subjectivity involved in terms of where do you break continuous data
Mhm.
into something that's not continuous.
Right.
But it doesn't mean it's impossible or improbable to do, and it doesn't mean it can't still be meaningful results. So things like that. I'm just
Right.
highlighting a couple of things real quick because
Yeah,
wanted to.
I wondered about how they handled non-response values too, like how they coded like how they treated those because if someone doesn't give an answer, that's still an answer.
Yeah.
And I don't know is still an answer. So if they code those as missing values, that's actually different than not than what actually happened in the survey. So I
Mhm.
guess, and then there were probably a few other things I missed, but in my general impression was that they meddled with the data set a lot. And I wondered, maybe that amount of meddling wasn't enough to change the results, but maybe it was. And so it's above my head to actually be able to know that. I don't remember enough from my regression classes. So,
I
and
mean,
you
it would
actually, as a climate scientist, use these kinds of techniques like on a daily basis. So
yes. The
yeah.
statistical thing is stuff I deal with all the time. Though I seem to lately break supercomputers. So, that's a story for
Oh
off
no.
air. That's a story for off air, but I've had a tendency lately to break supercomputers, which has been interesting for sure.
Wow. I'll have to hear about that one later.
Nothing really bad. It's just we don't know why. It keeps breaking when I
Mm.
do what I'm doing. So, um, anyway,
Mhm.
let me bring this up now that I've highlighted a little bit with it. Window. Here we go. Grab this one. So I went just to the second page, and I'm looking first at what they're talking about is there's an impasse, right? With the data, they some disagreements over whether or not the internet is good well-being or bad well-being in the literature, and fine, some of that is there. But they had an overarching goal of estimating the extent to which internet access, mobile internet access, and active internet use predicts psychological well being on a global level. To this end, we analyzed data from a series of cross sectional samples of 2.4 plus million individuals from 168 countries from 2006 to 2021. We studied 8 indicators of well being: life satisfaction, the extent to which individuals reported experiencing daily negative and positive experiences; 2 indices of social well being, physical well being, community well being, and experiences of purpose. Now, that purpose one is going to
Mhm.
be interesting in a minute because that's where I looked at it and went, sure. With that one, kind of caught my
Oh,
attention.
okay.
Um,
Okay. I did not pick up on that, so I'm interested to hear what you think of that.
Yeah, how they're going with purpose is one of those Gallup indices that were in there already in the data set, and it's one of those ones that was basically did not run the length of the period. It was not asked all the time. Of the 15-ish years, 16-ish years in there, it was run for maybe 3 years. So you really actually don't have
Oh,
all that much of a sample at all for that specific thing. And this
okay.
is one of the critiques I have because we all know that these polls and things like that change over time. They're not
They
necessarily
do.
always asking the same questions. They're not always asking they may be asking the about the same thing, but asking about it differently. And sometimes that does screw with a person's interpretation of it. So that's
Right.
one of these things with these kinds of long term things, particularly when you're relying on somebody else's data, which is what was, right? They were
Yeah.
relying on somebody else's survey. That's where it gets tricky to deal with and make sure there's consistency over time with
Yep.
some of the work. So, but just to make the point, current research questions then were as follows: A, to what extent does well being differ between individuals who report having access to or using mobile internet? And B, how robust are these differences in well being across different internet adoption predictors, well being outcomes, subgroups, and model covariate specifications? So there we go. That would be the particular research questions of this study.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. That's nowhere in there is it asking a medical question about whether
yeah,
your personal health and well-being will be improved by doom scrolling the New York Times.
or doom scrolling
Just
Twitter
saying.
or doom scroll, well,
Or
X, excuse
Twitter or
me. or
any other variety of horrible thing anyway.
ex-
I'm clearly very unbiased here. Wink, wink. Anyway.
We analyze data from the Gallup World Poll, GWP. The GWP is a nationally representative is a national what? Oh, okay. This is weird with the parentheses right there. That's where I got confused.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
GWP is a nationally representative, continuous annual panel survey of approximately 1,000 individuals from each of 168 countries conducted from 2005 to 2022. Gallup conducts the surveys through 1 hour interviews, either face to face or via telephone, with questionnaires that are translated into the major conversational language of each country. So this is an interesting thing because when you're relying on somebody else's data, I have an immediate question with this. Is it 1,000 individuals or is it the same 1,000 individuals? And odds are it probably isn't. You have no idea
Yeah,
if it's the same 1,000
from
individuals or not.
right, from year to year, you're not following that individual
Yeah.
person.
So
Right.
it's not a longitudinal study in that sense, from the Gallup folks. They're just taking a pulse of a particular country at a
Mm.
particular time.
Yep.
And that's what these authors were trying to use in this particular study. Which,
Yeah.
hit and miss,
Yeah,
and
that's
whether
actually
I
a
think it's great.
that's a
Yeah.
great point about how it's not a longitudinal study. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of the reports on this paper seem to treat it like it was, but those are not the same people year to year. And like, I'm sure it's not, because there'd be no way to track all of them down for that long and that at that great of number. And I don't think that's how Gallup works anyway. It's like, how are the
That's not
trends
Gallup's.
in the yeah, it's tracking basically how the trends are in these countries. So
Mhm.
the granularity is at the level of the country, not at the level of the individual at all.
Yep. Yep. And that's the other thing I was asking is like, I approximately 1,000 individuals. Okay, so it's are some countries more than 1,000, or some countries less? How does that change from year to year? All of those kinds of questions do come into play, and I asked that immediately for something like this, just because the authors are relying upon this data set, um,
Mhm.
to make their conclusions. And so I question how robust it is as of a general thing to be used for this kind of thing, where truthfully a longitudinal study would have been a better approach, because you can in longitudinal studies track individuals over time. That is the point
Individuals.
of them. That is the point of a
Well,
longitudinal
yeah,
study.
then they could have designed a simpler survey that really drills down into what they're after instead of kind of like
Mhm.
recoding and kind of sweeping together a bunch of different questions and making a bunch of assumptions about them and then, all of that. And
Yeah,
then uh it makes the computation stuff a lot simpler too because you could design the questions from the
yeah,
get-go to make them computationally less complex.
yeah.
So,
And that goes to the coding and recoding things that you were asking me about before, because, the
right.
changing of questions and the changing of people, you have to do some of that coding and recoding at certain change points and when the survey was done, because you have to try and maintain consistency with the thing you're actually after looking at. And
Yeah.
that's tricky to do. So I give them a lot of credit for trying. And admittedly, I
Yeah.
can understand why they went this route instead of using a longitudinal study themselves. It's
That'd
because
be
it's cheap.
crazy expensive.
It's cheap to do this, and it's very
Yeah,
expensive to do a longitudinal study for that
yeah,
long, and it would be astronomical with that number of individuals.
yeah. That would be yeah, it is that's a fair point. It is probably impossible to do a I can't talk, longitudinal study of this size. It would have to
Yeah.
be, like a tenth of the size or smaller even than that, so
Mhm.
huh.
Um, so yeah, some statistical things that they mentioned that are relevant for us is, sample was little over half, women, and the age range, 75% was between 26 and 64. Which is,
50
I
oh,
feel,
54.
54, excuse me.
Yeah, it's okay.
Which which is a decent age range to work with.
Yeah, yeah.
They're working individuals mostly, rather than
Mhm.
teenagers or, seniors.
Yeah.
So,
There were teenagers and seniors in this data set as well.
yeah.
They're just not the bulk of it.
Yeah, so yeah, because the way to interpret this would be interquartile range of age. So you had 25% would be under 26 and 25% that would be over 54. So
Yeah.
you do have some seniors in there, but the bulk of them, the vast majority, were in that middle age range.
Mhm. Cool. So,
Ba-dum.
yeah, and I guess this is the part where they were recoding and reforming, and maybe it wasn't an issue. Their reasons for why they did it made sense. Um, I think I was just imagining, like, when you mess with it that much, the all the little changes you make add up and might not have an effect, but might, you know?
Yeah,
But
this
then
is where
yeah.
one has to be careful and bracket it with a certain amount of uncertainty or a confidence interval of some variety because
Yeah.
how you did it perhaps does have something of an effect on the results. It may not be much, maybe tiny, it may be an insignificant effect, but this is why confidence intervals kind of matter.
Yeah. Yep.
And they do get to that. Don't get me wrong. We're only
Yeah.
in the methods section, so they get to that.
I know it's funny whenever we do this show, it's comes up so many times that like the paper itself is fine and it's been misunderstood by the people talking about it and wielding it to various ends. And for those of you doing audio only, Adrian is nodding her head vigorously. So yeah, it's definitely a
Well,
problem, not so much on the end of the scientists as it is on the end of the people that are misinterpreting. So that's why we do this show. We
mhm,
are trying to really demonstrate like it takes a lot to actually understand a paper at all. And to understand it well enough to explain it to someone else is a whole nother.
mhm. Well,
So
and to your point, this is a little bit of a philosophical tangent, but I remember being asked when I was working on my PhD. I think it was one of my oral, not my oral, but one of my written prelim questions one before my dissertation defense was basically along the lines of, are you as the scientist responsible for how your stuff is received? Meaning you're responsible for that communication pipeline um, from yourself through the media to the public, or even now with social media, are you responsible for how it's tweeted? If you tweet about your own work and
mhm,
somebody misinterprets what you said, are you responsible for that? And I know at the time, and I think it still is, my answer is that, well, yes and no. Obviously, you should do your level best to communicate your results yourself
mhm,
if you want to do that by media or social media means. But you can't fully control how everybody's going to interpret it or how everybody's going to use it. And frankly, I don't want to because I'm not an authoritarian. Um,
yes. That's
so,
yeah, we want people to be free to misunderstand things.
yeah, I would prefer that
That's
to
yeah,
authoritarians controlling things.
yep,
So
yeah, for sure. And, I would wanna know from the authors why they wouldn't have included the thing about the teen girls, social well-being in the abstract, since a lot of people read the abstract only because
yeah,
sometimes they can't actually read the rest of it due to paywalls or whatever, that little piece of information would have been a nice balance to the other
yeah,
results. Like, "Oh, in general, it seems to have raise the well-being of the world on average. However, there's a couple of pockets where that's not the case." Like that was a
mhm,
better way of summarizing what they found, I thought. But
yeah,
so
definitely.
those kinds of things I think are good for scientists to remember like, oh, if you're writing an abstract, you should probably be really careful to craft that abstract knowing that that is like what 99% of the people who see your paper are going to see.
Right,
So,
right. So yeah, I mean, the recoding stuff I read and I didn't really have a problem with. Like, um,
oh, but we
yeah,
talked about the missing values, which I thought was
yes, that
maybe
I think
more
that was the one you
relevant.
were. I think that was the one you were asking me about. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, First,
Yeah.
GWP measured internet access with does your home have access to the internet from 2006 to 2015, where the mean percentage of non-missing values was 96.9. From 2016 to 2011, a similar question measured overall internet access with do you have internet access in any way, whether on a mobile phone, a computer, or some other device? Mean valid response is 99.3%. So that's what I was talking about, a change of question that could be going on there. And Gallup probably did that just in response to the fact that everybody in the US and Western world kind of things does have a lot of smartphones.
Right.
And they're getting
Yeah, because
prolific to a lot of different countries.
you could say, like, "Does your home have access to the internet?" And someone would say, "No, but they do have a smartphone," and that's not like a home
Yeah,
connection. Yeah, so I see why they would wanna change that question. But yeah, for
yeah,
sure, then there's gonna be I
But
mean, I yeah.
this is where I would have a question for the authors because they did say, because hang on, let me highlight it so that box will go away. Because
Yep.
these two questions were so similar, and to extend the range of data coverage, we combined the two into one variable that indicate internet access. Okay, this is the question I would ask because those are two different questions. They're not exactly the same thing. And I would not necessarily call them exactly similar either because one of them is about home internet access and one of them is about internet access period at this point. So those are two very different things. So did
Mhm.
you see what's called in statistics a change point happen? Is there some
Mm.
difference in the responses between 2006 to 2015 and 2016 and onward that we should know about that is the result of that being a different question? When
Right.
you tried to group them together with respect to the um, internet access argument that you were making. And I
Right.
think, if I recall correctly, they did do it a little bit differently with respect to some of the figures in internet adoption um, later on, but we can get to that. So we got time, although we'll try and be quick. No.
Yeah. Yeah,
um,
I was pondering if it was ever possible for us to do this in under an hour, and I wonder if that may be a pipe dream on my part.
we have so much fun with these things. So
Yes.
let's see. So second asked about mobile internet. Can your mobile phone be used to access the internet from 2017 to 2021? Third, GWP measured internet use with have you used the internet in the past 7 days, whether on a mobile phone, a computer, or some other device from 2015 to 2021? You're noticing some of these valid responses, are going down pretty dramatically. So that's another question is the sample of overall responses for certain things has dropped too. So really, it's not necessarily 2 million people. It's in this particular case, at most, it's 64% of 2 million people.
Right.
So that's actually a pretty significant drop off, but just a point to
Yeah.
take there.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. All these items had binary yes no responses, and respondents were given the option to decline an answer or report that they did not know. We were coded these latter two as missing values. So I actually don't have a problem with that in terms of coding them that way because they had the option to say yes or no,
Right.
and they decided not to answer or just to say, we really don't know. And so that does make sense to me as a missing value. In this
Yeah.
case, unless you wanted to introduce a third kind of option of, no idea. In which case,
Yeah.
you'd still have to, the decline to answer, you still have to put that as a missing value because you don't know either way what the answer is. You could put the other one as a third option of, we really don't know kind of thing.
So how would having a third answer change sort of like the strength of the association in that case of yes? You know what I mean? Maybe it wouldn't. These are like the sort of math questions that I'm like, maybe I'm just making this up because I want to find something wrong.
Right. Um, it's possible that it could change the strength of the association a little bit. It would take the valid sample down, actually. It would decrease the valid available sample for them to work with because this is 64.5% valid responses, for instance. Well, if
Mhm.
some of those are declined to answer or missing, because a decline is still a valid response, you just didn't want to answer that question because when they're checking for invalid responses, they're checking for odd, weird things that came up,
Yeah,
not for
right. Like nonsense values, not
yeah,
like not answering and saying you don't know is not a missing value or an invalid answer. It is an
yeah.
answer. So,
It's still an answer.
yeah.
But those things that got coded as missing values, they couldn't really use them to do the association with.
Mhm.
They'd have to remove them from the sample.
Mhm.
Um, and any of the associated responses on the other questions. You have to remember that it just doesn't decrease the sample with respect to answering this question. It decreases the sample with respect to all the rest of the questions that they might use to determine all of those particular
Yes.
relationships because they have to have matching numbers to work with to make any
Yeah.
kind of linear relationship, right?
Yeah, they're
So,
looking for like the overlap, like
exactly.
the Venn diagram of like what group of people answered all the questions. That's like you end up losing quite a lot when you do that.
Yeah. I know I had a bunch of things. So actually, yeah, this is getting into
Getting into
yeah,
weeds there.
it's going to get into the weeds, but some of it matters because of some of the other things they did later where I'm like, I'm not so sure this works because you either had something that was really small sample at that point. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yes, teach
knowing
us all
again,
some regression. I need to
yeah.
relearn. Keeps this show keeps my brain like sciency. This is the only way that I engage with the journals now. So, thank you for watching us do this and for just having this show. So,
Yep, for listening. So let's see, on page 2, this is where they actually get to the well-being outcomes that they're then relating to the internet usage. So you have your predict and, as it were, up here with the internet usage kind of thing, and you have your it's not seeing my mouse. That's interesting. You can't see that I'm scrolling my mouse over a particular area. I don't know why it's not showing, but okay.
hmm.
You can tell that I'm scrolling, and you can probably tell when I highlight something like this, but my
Yeah.
mouse is actually on that screen moving around. So
Oh, I guess is there a way to change that in StreamYard? Can you like go off to it looks
um
like there's a little oh no, that's in the PDF.
I'm surprised. I'm actually really surprised because that normally I don't have a problem
Hmm,
at all.
who
So
knows?
it's strange that it's not capturing that right now. I'll have to check the sharing settings at some point, but it's not a big deal for right now. Let's see. So they're getting into the predictans, as it were, focused on 8 measures of well-being, broadly defined in the GWP: life satisfaction, negative and positive experiences, and social life satisfaction. In addition to these 4 outcomes, which were included in the GWP from 2006 to 2021, we studied 4 indicators from the Gallup Share Care Global Wellbeing Index, or the GWBI, which is a quote barometer of individuals' perceptions of their own well-being. This is where it gets interesting for me sometimes. Life satisfaction
Mhm.
was measured with a single item. Please imagine a ladder with steps numbered from 0 at the bottom to 10 at the top. The top of the ladder represents the best possible life for you, and the bottom represents the worst possible life for you. On which step of the ladder would you say you personally feel you stand at this time? The key thing there is the at this time, because it's whenever the survey is taken.
Right,
And
and
Lord only
that's
knows what's
it's
happening in that person's life right at that moment.
yeah, the snapshot. Yeah, I'd answer different to that question depending on a lot of things. And interestingly, I was talking to my husband about this. I am an internet addict for real. Like, I'm the kind of person that if you read an article, about somebody that's like, "Oh, internet addiction ruined my life." I'm like kind of in that bucket of people in a way. I do have a pretty good handle on it these days thanks to timer apps and all sorts of great things. But I would say 10 out of 10 on that because my life is the best possible life for me. I'm very happy with my life. I think it's great. Doesn't mean I'm not an internet addict. So, that's like those are two different questions to me. Like I think I guess this is just sort of like what is this really capturing like you said on any one individual's day, but it's also not necessarily going to capture whether the internet thing is negatively I mean, sometimes people don't realize that it's negatively impacting their lives too, and that's like a whole other conversation about, like, if you're an addict, you might be in denial, and you might think, "Life's great because I have all the internet that I need," you know? So, it is an interesting question, but that's sort of sidestepping the point you're probably trying to make anyway.
No, 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 no. That's what I was trying to make. Is just like at
Yeah.
any given moment, that could be very different. I think if you ask the same individual, like the questions about internet use wouldn't be the thing that changed all that much. You probably still have access to the internet either way. But that kind of life
Mhm.
experience thing for an individual, maybe up, maybe down on a particular day, you
Right.
know?
Yep.
But let's see. Negative and positive experiences are both measured through a set of 5 yes/no items. For negative experiences, respondents answered the prompts, quote, "Did you experience the following feelings during a lot of the day yesterday? How about physical pain, worry, sadness, stress, anger?" For positive experiences, the items were: did you feel well rested yesterday? Were you treated with respect all day yesterday? How are these at all related to internet connectivity? But anyway, did you smile or laugh a lot yesterday? Did you learn or experience something interesting yesterday? Did you experience the following feelings during a lot of the day yesterday? How about enjoyment?
I think they aren't related to internet use, but I think it's just trying to measure different aspects of how happy people are,
Mhm.
because I think they mention in the discussion that sometimes, uh okay, always it's hard to tell with these association studies if internet use increases because of as a reaction to poor social happiness and poor and low well-being, or does the internet cause low well-being? It could be a vicious
Exactly.
cycle. It could be both, and they just feed each other, and it's hard to
Well,
know
this
where it began.
this is what I was going to say. Actually, it was one of the critiques I had of the article because I know they say positive well-being, but okay, wait a second. We also know that from social media, you get a heck of a lot of dopamine hits for every like and retweet and all those kinds of things. You get dopamine hits from that. That's
Yeah.
now out there very much in literature. And so I'm just like, are we inadvertently associating positive well-being with the fact that people are getting dopamine hits, particularly because of the use of social media, which frankly dominates most of this time period that they looked at,
Yeah.
particularly in Western countries. I mean, you may not, maybe not so for other countries, um, but particularly for Western countries, you have so much social media use by this point and growing as you're going through that whole period they have. I'm just like, is the positive association just because you're getting the dopamine hits that you want?
Yeah, I mean, you could say, if you spent all day long on Reddit with all your internet friends and they treated you with respect all day yesterday,
Exactly.
and maybe you smiled and laughed a lot because you were scrolling cat videos all day. Maybe you learned to do something interesting because you were on YouTube watching how-to videos, and maybe you didn't actually do the thing, but you just got the feeling that you learned a new thing because you watched a how-to video. That's a real thing. It's like activity simulator. You're realizing you're not actually doing anything. You think you are, but you're just watching
You're
other
really not.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then did you experience enjoyment? Yeah, lots of people experience enjoyment on the internet. So it doesn't, just because it feels good doesn't mean it's good for you, I guess, that's what, yeah.
I mean, that's what I'd say too. It's just like, just
Mhm.
because it feels good doesn't mean it is good, people.
And I think though they're doing these aren't, I think, at least on my end of things, I'm not necessarily criticizing the researchers because they didn't design these questions. They were just trying to dig it through the data set to look for questions that might
Yeah.
indicate well-being. So they were picking a whole bunch of different things to try to capture some face of the picture of someone's well-being. And
Mm.
so I'm not necessarily doubting that that was a bad idea, or that, that they should have
Yeah. No,
done the things I'm saying, but these are just, if you're going to interpret this study, these are just ways of thinking about these questions differently.
yeah, no, I agree with you because, like I said, the authors are doing the best they can with the data set they had to work with. So it's not necessarily like if they were to design the study themselves, they'd probably ask it very differently.
Right.
Um, or well, not probably because we don't know. I mean, they may ask it very differently. Let's put it a little bit more caveat it that way. But
Yeah.
um, the one that I wanted to point out that annoyed me was this one because the whole thing about purpose being one of the ones that they started
Ah,
looking at one point
right.
in 2013 through 2015, so 3 years maybe. The GWP database also included a Gallup Sharecell Global Wellbeing Index, GWBI, which measured, among others, experiences of purpose, liking what one does each day and being motivated to achieve one's goals. Community well being, liking where one lives, feeling safe and having pride in one's community. Physical well being, having good health and enough energy to get things done daily. And social well being, having supportive relationships and love in your life. Experiences of purpose were measured with prompts of you like what you do every day and you learn or do something interesting every day. Community well being was prompted with, hang on a second, with the city or area where you live is a perfect place for you. And in the last 12 months, you have received recognition for helping to improve the city or area where you live.
Hmm.
Physical well being prompts in the last 7 days, you have felt active and productive every day, and your physical health is near perfect. Social well being was measured with the same items as the above social life index, but instead on a rating scale. All GWBI items included the prompt thinking about your life in general. Please rate your level of agreement with each of the following using a 5 point scale, where 5 means you strongly agree and 1 means you strongly disagree. So, the other thing I would point out with this is none of these are actually connected with psychometrics in psychology as much. This is something that just comes from Gallup. So, as
Yep.
a point of note there, but my biggest consternation with this is you're making an awful lot of conclusions about some very important things, like the internet giving you a sense of purpose is effectively what they're talking about with this,
Yeah.
using 3 years of data out of the
Yeah.
16.
Right. Yeah, the GWBI is a small subset, and actually, then Figure 1, they even showed that there was no
Yeah,
time
let me go down there.
overlap between that figure is really confusing.
Yeah,
It took me a while to understand what it was showing, but the line here is the little, like, the black dots
yep.
connected by the line. It's showing the difference between yes and no to internet access, having or not having internet access.
So yeah, this is
So,
it's always not having on the left and it's having on the right.
yeah, so all the yeses are pretty much like having internet increases those things, except for negative experiences where it decreases the negative experiences, which is essentially the same result, but just said differently. And then I guess there was one where the GWBI community
Yep.
rating and uh what
Maybe
was
the
that?
social rating is the other one,
Oh,
but
it was you having used the internet in the past 7 days and
yep.
GWBI community, that was like no difference between yes and no. Um,
I
and
was
then
gonna
that
say
the dot down at the bottom was whatever
the dot is
oh,
the
the
yes minus
difference.
no
Yeah.
difference. Yeah.
Why did they do that? That's a I was like not I couldn't figure out why you would put that on there.
I mean, for some of the things where it's hard to see that there is a difference, or in a way you can make a little bit of a determination about whether the difference is actually all that significant.
Hmm.
Um, because like they don't have just the black dot here, which is like the mean response. I think they have the cloud of points from every respondent that they could have in there. Which
Yeah.
one of the things that I actually seriously want with this is what's the n here for each of these plots? What's the actual number of points used for each of these individual things? Because I guarantee you it's not the full
Mm,
sample, particularly with that GWBI
right.
thing, because it was only around for 3 years. It can't be the full sample of 2 million people.
Yeah, and it
Um,
wasn't around it says there's no those blank ones, those 4 blank boxes
yeah,
in the bottom mean that the phone enabled internet and the GWBI data were not there was when
there
the
was no
GWBI
overlap. Yeah,
questions were asked, there was no phones yet.
yeah. The
Or
mobile
yeah,
internet access question, they didn't start asking it until 2016, and the GWBI stuff was phased out at the end of 2015.
right.
So there was no overlap in those.
That's a better way of saying what I said because there were internet enabled phones at that point. It was just they weren't asking about them.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. That's the thing. But yeah, I think with some of these, like the yes no difference, you can see if there's a lot of it that covers over. Like this, you can see a lot of. Oh gosh, of course you can't see my mouse. Ah, this is
Yeah,
unhelpful.
you gotta do the the boxing. I think that does work, just to
Yeah,
highlight it with the box.
oddly doesn't. The boxing oddly works, but you can't see my cursor on there, which is strange.
Yeah,
Um, but this thing here that I've got highlighted right now, you can see there's a whole bubble of little gray circles all around it.
yep.
So that's what I was just saying. You can get a sense of some of the significance of these different things, the statistical significance there, if there's a lot of overlap of this cloud over zero. Like even this one, I would say this is a slight increase from no to yes in this one,
Ah,
but I would not
right.
call it statistically significant in the
Right.
slightest because it overlaps 0 so much.
Yeah.
Um,
And there aren't the increase is tiny, but you would expect that with a data size this big and this varied. You would expect
yeah,
the signal to be very weak.
yeah.
So,
And, you can kinda see it with some of these in particular that some of them are not positive associations. Like, you could probably tell in some of this one that there are some points on the right-hand side that are higher
mhm.
on the left-hand side. That you can see that there are some folks who found a negative association with that. And then maybe
Yeah.
the teenage girls that they talk about later.
Yeah. Right, that could be one of the pockets. So,
Yeah,
just just because there's a positive overall association found doesn't mean that
yeah.
you as an individual will have a positive experience.
In fact of
So,
the matter, you can see it pretty strongly, like the little top dot on the left-hand side, the little top gray
yeah.
dot, that line goes way down very
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah. So there are if you look at the clouds around the black line, you can see some more interesting I'm glad they put that in there. That does help a little bit.
That does help, but I mean, I still honestly want what the samples are for all of these different what's the sample size for
Yeah.
each of these different things? Because 'Cause they're not all
Oh,
the
yeah,
same.
they didn't put a n equals for each one of those.
Yeah.
That would have been
So, because
helpful.
the key thing here from the statistical side of it is this value of B, because that's the slope of the linear
Yeah.
regression in here.
Right.
And so, if it's positive, they are saying internet access has a generally positive relationship with, I'm sorry, the community well-being one in that case that I highlighted, the
Mhm.
community purpose and well-being thing is generally positively related to internet access. I.e., if you have internet
Yeah.
access, you're slightly more connected to your community or something like that, which
Yeah.
doubtful, but it's
Yeah.
where I go with that one. But
Yep.
things like that for sure. But
But you
and
were talking about something else with purpose. Did you finish your thought on that? I can't remember.
no, I did, because my thing with this is that it is such a small sample size compared to the rest of it that I
Right.
wonder about how valid it really is. And the question, let me go back. Where were the questions of purpose?
Yeah, that yellow paragraph you got there.
Liking what one does each day and being motivated to achieve one's goals. Um, Measured with prompts, you like what you do every day and you learn or do something interesting every day. Well, let's say for a moment you don't like whatever you do every day
Mhm.
and you don't necessarily learn something interesting every day. Does that mean you are not living a purposeful life, or you don't feel like you have purpose in your life?
Right.
That's
Yeah,
what
it could
this goes back to the survey, not to the authors. This is not a problem for the authors. This is a problem for the survey that they used. But
yeah.
I question that being a really decent measure of someone feeling like they have purpose in their lives.
Yeah, I
Because
think that's very true. That is not what I would call purpose. I would call that like a nice convenient life, like a smooth operating life. Like if I like what I do and I feel motivated every day to achieve my goals, that means I'm probably not running into a lot of like
you're
stick
not running into serious
yeah.
problems, because if you're
Yeah.
living a really good life with purpose and you're trying to do something you might find meaningful, well, wouldn't you be running into a problem at some point
Yeah, I
that
mean,
makes you
sure
not like
that
your day? Not like
yeah,
your
I guess
day-to-day work?
purpose is more like you feel like your existence on this earth matters towards something.
Yeah.
That's like more of what I would think purpose is. Like, do you think that you existing is having an impact? Like you're 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 doing something, you're about something, like what you stand for. That's like, I don't know, it's a little deeper than just liking what you do and feeling motivated.
Yeah, exactly. So that it bugged me because, you know, like I have a purpose to be in research pursuing the truth, and I was talking about the fact that I break supercomputers lately. Well, I don't like that. That's been the problem the last few days of work is I keep breaking things, and I While it's at times amusing, it doesn't mean I like it, and I don't like having to solve
Yeah.
that particular problem. I don't like having to deal with the bureaucratic crap sometimes that
Right.
comes with doing research nowadays. I mean, you
Yeah.
you you got a taste of it while you were working on your PhD for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, a
um,
little it was a little hairy there for a bit.
I don't like that bureaucratic nonsense. I don't like a whole lot of the bureaucratic stuff I'm going to have to deal with, and then in certain things upcoming in career wise. And so I have a purpose with my life. Does that mean I do what I do every day? No.
Yeah, right. And so if you picked like a 3 out of 5 for that, where you say some days I like it, some days I don't, then that would mean that you had a low rating of purpose, which is false.
Yeah, or a
Like
kind of middle of the road rating of purpose, which again is a
you
false thing. I have
yeah,
a very strong sense of purpose in my life,
right.
but
Even if on a scale of 1 to 5, maybe you're at a 3 of liking each individual day, and some days you might not feel motivated, and that's normal. That's actually very normal. It's human.
yeah,
So, yeah, that's a weird question. I agree with you. I wouldn't call
I mean,
purpose that.
I might do something interesting every day. I like breaking a supercomputer, but
Right. Yeah. I do plenty of interesting things every day. They're not always fun.
not always fun, and we don't necessarily like them.
Right. Well,
But
yeah, that's a good point.
anyway, um, but yeah, this is actually part of they got into the regression side of things down here, which is what all of this is about.
Yeah, I looked at
Um,
that and I was like, "Yep, that looks like a regression equation. Moving on." I recognize the symbols like the beta and the
yeah, I
sum and
mean,
the yeah, all
for the
that, but
most
I'm like,
part, yeah, for the most part, it's a multi-level multi-level linear regression kind of thing. So it's pretty standard and basic.
mhm.
Oh, I know R. They use this package. I know that package. I know that
Cool.
package. Um,
Yep.
and I mean, this is getting more and more common too, actually. Is if you'll notice this, for folks who are savvy with programming and want to go take a look at the code, more and more authors are loading their code on something called Zenodo. Um,
Oh, okay.
so just because Zenodo gives you a DOI identifier, which makes it easy to do citations of your code and things like that. So a lot of
Oh, that's
folks are doing
cool.
that now. So it does make it handy. So
Cool.
just wanted to point that out. But yeah, I've been talking for a while. Was there something in particular you wanted to get into?
I am not sure. I think actually I didn't have a whole lot of comments. I think I have more to say on like kind of a philosophical front about like the value of so should we you and I've been talking about this and I think we talked about it in the last episode maybe is like should science inform your life choices? And I would say yes-ish because the data is obviously very important, but you're always working with incomplete information and you're always working with tentative things like this because of the nature of science. Popper talks about this like the tentative nature of conclusions. So you really end up leaning a lot more on your values to make decisions than on data. And so if you don't know what you believe and you can just be blown with the wind every which way, then it can be easy to, I don't know, like overinterpret stuff that you see because you're not really realizing the values that you have. Like you haven't identified, like, oh, I actually uh, want to use the internet. So I'm going to be really excited when I see a study that says it's good for me. And so then I'm going to say that I'm informing my life choices with science, but you're kind of not actually doing that. So that's one thing. And I guess the other thing is I don't really have any reason to doubt the results of the study if you interpret it the way the authors wanted it to be interpreted. The way that the news interprets it, I disagree with. My life choices that I am making are based on my experiences with the internet, and I'm making the choice for my own well being to not use it. So, in my particular situation, that corollary is the opposite
Yeah,
direction as what that figure shows. And that's fine. That figure accounts for the fact that some of us are going to not have a positive experience with the internet.
indeed. Yeah, they did a good job with that in accounting for that particular aspect. And like the thing about the negative experiences in there, we didn't get into it in too much in the figure, but you can see like the general black line is down, and that's agreed. That's followed up with figure 2, which is sort of the thing where they account for demographics and things like that
Yeah.
in there. But the I had a lot of questions with the negative experiences thing because of the issues of cyberbullying that got talked about later in the article, amongst other things of internet addiction and
Mhm.
the like. That I'm just like, wait a second. This is where I come back to the thing I was saying before about the dopamine hits. Are
Mhm.
people just saying they've had fewer negative experiences because of the dopamine hits they get from likes and shares, or because the algorithm is only feeding them things they want to see and agree with that validates everything that they think anyway?
Yeah.
And particularly toward the tail end of that sample is where I wonder about that answer because um, the whole thing with algorithms has grown and changed so much over time where there's so much algorithmic stuff going on now that you click like on one thing and you're getting fed like 10 or 20 things
Yeah.
that are similar to what you liked.
Yeah.
So it's
Yep.
that's the question I have, is that negative experiences thing and that positive experiences thing and the life satisfaction thing particular and some of the other stuff, all because you're getting, or not all because, but particularly toward the end of that sample, more so because you're getting fed more and more stuff that you like
Yeah.
rather than
Yeah.
seeing anything you disagree with.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it depends on what you're doing on the internet is probably maybe the broader point. If you lived in a country that had, poor access to educational tools and medical information and companionship, and your town or your home, you finally got the internet and you're able to go on WebMD and look up your symptoms, or like make a friend or learn a hobby or read about philosophy or learn calculus, like, yeah, that's great, and those are the things that the internet is great for. But then if you're doom scrolling, you know Twitter, or X, or whatever that people want to call things these
It's
days.
yeah, it's
X,
X now, but
X,
anyway,
yeah. So
it's
if
still
you're,
Twitter.
yeah, social media in general, that's a different thing than like calculus tutorials. And so there's so many sub questions to the "is the internet bad for you" question, that
Yeah,
like this sort of averaging over the globe, that's part of the question. So we're always
yeah.
looking at like the truth is this complex thing and we all see a different face of it, and every study is like a different face of it.
See,
And so that's this study looked at that little face of the truth, but there's like this whole other thing. So
you're actually making me think because I want to check real quick because I can't remember what the covariates were that they used. Because they had the just basic question of regression of well-being versus all those well-being measures versus internet access, but then they had all this
yeah.
covariate analysis to make sure it's not related to certain things. So I think, what is it?
Oh, did they talk about income being one example of a
Yeah, here we go.
covariate?
Here it
Yeah.
is. We chose 6 variables to represent potentially confounding factors that have been previously considered important in the literature on well-being. The respondents' income, educational, work, and relationship statuses, their ability to meet basic needs for food and shelter, and whether or not they reported having health problems. So those are the 6 covariates,
Right.
essentially. In addition to these covariates, we identified meaningful subgroups in the data. Previous research has highlighted important differences between age groups and sexes in their levels of well being and use of internet technologies and associations between the two. We therefore conducted our analyses separately for each sex and age group. However, to reduce computational complexity of our analyses and because there are no strong a priori reasons to assume large differences between adjacent ages, we split the continuous age variable into 6 categories, which was 15 to 24, 25 to 34, 34 to 35 to 44, 45 to 54, 55 to 64, and 65 and over.
Yeah. So,
So,
yeah, there are a
but
lot of other factors that could contribute to these associations and that are
yeah,
tough
I
to
mean,
tease out, but
that's
they
where I would
tried.
be.
Yeah.
That's what I'm at. They tried, and this goes back to, again. This is not a knock on the authors at all. This goes back to the fact that they're using somebody else's data, really, to try and make this
Yes.
conclusion. Because the biggest caveat I can see with this is that nobody asked them, what are you actually using the internet for? To your point
Right.
of what you're talking about, you could be using the internet for some really meaningful things.
Mhm.
Like maybe I'm just reading news articles, or maybe I am learning calculus, or maybe I'm learning how to edit videos. Any number of those different kinds of things. or
Yeah.
you could be doom scrolling.
Yeah. I mean, this show is one of the few positive experiences I have with the internet these days, so I keep doing it. But there are many things that I don't do anymore because they were very, very not that. So it really depends. Yeah. So this is, but they say at the end that, it would be good to continue asking questions about this problem, because is the internet good for you or bad for you is an enormous question that there's not any way to ask it in one paper and actually come up with a useful answer for
Yeah,
for
I think I
guiding
just
your life choices at the very least. You can't draw conclusions. It's like our show about the gas stoves, where like, can you draw conclusions about what your life choices should be based on this one study? No. And this is the same thing. Your values are going to dictate your life choices
oh,
as
they did
well.
compare individuals to each other. I didn't realize that. I thought they were not. Well, I guess I quasi realized it when we were looking at the figure, but apparently they did compare individuals to each other.
You mean not they weren't able to track individuals over 16 years though?
No,
Oh, but what is this compare oh, where the associations were like within countries, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think associations within countries they could work with.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's still different people every year.
yeah, it's still different people every year.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, sorry. Now I figured it might be good to highlight the
Yeah.
caveats that they made, because I give them credit that they actually did say something like, "Hey,
Yeah.
look, there are certain things we need to look at," and all this other kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Things like all these kinds of things in here. Like, while between person data such as we studied can inform inferences about average causal effects, longitudinal studies that track individuals and their internet use over time would be more informative in understanding the context of how and why an individual might be affected by internet technologies and platforms. That's
Yeah.
We said it
Yeah.
earlier.
It's
So
basically yeah, basically they agree with us, so that's cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
uh Third, while the
That's always
construct
nice when that happens.
that's lovely. Third,
Mhm.
while the constructs that we studied represent the general gamut of well-being outcomes that are typically studied in connection to digital media and technology, they do not capture everything, nor are
Mhm.
they standard and methodically validated measures otherwise found in psychological literature. That is, the GWP data that we use represent a uniquely valuable resource in terms of its scope, both over time
Mm.
and space, but the measurement quality of its items and scales might not be sufficient to
Mhm.
capture the targeted constructs in the detailed manner that we would hope for, which is just
Yeah.
saying we know our data set's not the greatest thing.
Right. Yeah, and I mean what they did, I would say, is they falsified the assumption that there'd be this massive negative association or some massive positive association that pops up even when you average it over the whole planet. So
Mhm.
they did falsify that we would see any like strong signal. We didn't. And so we know what we don't know. We
Yep.
know we know that the associations are small in this particular case, but we know that they're not large. So that's at least useful information. So that's going to maybe clue us in that individual factors of what you're doing on the internet, what else is going on in your life, what country you live in, the political state of things, your health, like all these different factors are actually worth looking at. And if you just do a big old 2 million people study, you can't get that much information. It's not
Mhm.
obvious enough at that level. And that is what we learned from this, I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, validity of self-reported measures of technology engagement is lacking because some people basically don't necessarily like to, you know, reports of use don't correlate with actual use as well as people
Uh,
would think. It's,
yes. People are not honest about things on
People are not
surveys.
always honest
Yeah.
in
Yep.
surveys, so that does happen, and that's very hard to track whether or not somebody's being honest in a survey. So
Yeah.
you got to caveat that all the time. And then the
Yep.
final one is the most important thing, which you hinted at the beginning. Finally, we further highlight the tentative at most nature of our results with respect to causal effects of internet access and use on individuals' well-beings. Causal inference from observational data, such as that studied here, is notoriously difficult. Critical theoretical assumptions must be made and properly applied in the statistical models in order to approach unbiased causal estimates, steps we did not take in the current work. In other words, they don't know why.
Yeah, and they can't with that type of method. That's not what they were trying to do.
Yep, that's not
So,
what they were trying to do with
yep.
this. But I'm glad they caveated it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
certainly an interesting study, but I definitely go back to, well, I'm thinking in my head, well, why would some of these things be? And I do think some of the dopamine stuff and what have you is in there. And like one of the things that I wish they would do is go back and redo some of their charts over time. Like first
Mm,
5 years of the data set, second 5 years of the data set, third 5 years of the data set, something like that. Just to see, is there any
mm.
difference in that kind of yes, no thing over time, particularly as social media use became pretty dang prolific on the later part of that period.
Yeah, I mean, that change point of social media becoming sort of really, really dominant when it wasn't, because you and I are old enough to have remembered that switch. We were adults when that happened.
I
So,
remember flip phones.
yeah, I had one recently and I decided it was a waste of money because it broke like very quickly. So
Oh,
they're
geez.
not made well anyway. Yeah, no, it was only $10 to get one, so it was not a huge loss, um but yeah, so what was my point? Oh, measuring, like, I don't know, repeating this analysis with before social media and after social media would be interesting. I think that might make some signals more loud. If you might see some
Yeah,
interesting things you can't see when you average it over everything.
yeah. But
So
I mean, that was
I
the
have
main
no more.
thoughts that.
Yeah, I have no
Yeah.
more comments on
Okay.
it.
That was the main bunch of thoughts that I had. I mean, I don't know where you're at, but overall, this is another one that I would put more in the apple pie side of our
Yeah.
scale than the dumpster fire scale. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than a lot
No.
of things we've read on this channel.
Yeah, I have no reason to doubt their results. I think that they measured what they measured, and it's up to the news to stop misinterpreting these things for political ends. And so if you're a listener out there and you're not a journalist and you read news, or if you are a journalist, then do your homework. But if you're reading the news, please know that many times what you read is misunderstanding the science. It almost
Mm,
always is. My parents tell me all the time, "Hey, I heard this thing, blah 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 blah," and so I'm like, "All right, I'll call you back." Da-da-da-da-da. I start digging it up. I find the thing, and I'm like, "Oh, okay, that's why people are saying this. Okay, mom and dad, here's actually what's going on." So I guarantee you can almost assume that if you're reading a news article about science, it's getting something wrong. So just,
yep.
always have your spidey senses on high alert for that sort of thing.
Hmm.
So,
And hopefully we can talk about this more in the sort of course development over time for Wokescreen. That kind of
oh
thing would be.
yeah.
I've been starting to work on that on the side. We'll talk about that later, but starting to work on that more on the
How
side. So,
is it a course on how to read science news?
no, first things first is a course on how to read a scientific paper, like what we just did.
Oh, okay. That's a good idea for a course. I think probably some undergraduates need that course too.
There's a lot of people who need those kind of courses, but
Oh yeah.
before I forget, speaking of, since I mentioned it before, don't forget that Wokescreen is pretty dang awesome. And we hope that you become a member at wokescreen.com/culture-warriors, where you can, of course, you end up connecting with me because I'm a member over there behind the scenes. And Deb from The Reason We Learn is over there too, along a lot with a few other folks who are fabulous creative folks. And we talk about all sorts of things, the news of the day and what have you, and just get into interesting philosophical conversations. Pardon me, the cat just tried to get on my lap. Um,
We almost got through the entire show without a cat interruption. So good job,
well,
cats.
there's a cat on the floor behind me. There's one that's just, oh, yeah, there she is. She's under the desk. Um, but there's lots of good things happening over there. I encourage you to become a member because you can actually help build better culture, as it were, because that's the point here with Wokescreen. So use my code ScioSophia for 10% off. Anyway, that
Fantastic. I hope you join. I hope you meet some new friends, and I can vouch for all those people being pretty cool. So do it. It's good for you. Except it's the internet, so do it with in moderation.
In moderation. Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
Alrighty. I don't think I have anything else to add.
Nope. Well, thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.
See you next time, everybody, and may you always stay curious. Thanks for watching this episode of the Rogue Journal Club. If you would like to suggest ideas for the show, please consider becoming a supporter of Wokescreen at wokescreen.com/culture-warriors. Use promo code ScioSophia for 10% off your membership. The Rogue Journal Club is a ScioSophia production. Copyright 2024.